Jake Morrison wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag as he looked at the strange metal wreck sitting in Murphy's salvage yard. The morning sun made the twisted hull shine in ways that normal metal should not shine. He had driven 20 miles outside Denver just to see this thing that everyone in town was talking about. Old Murphy stood beside him, chewing on a toothpick and grinning like he had found a pot of gold. The ship was not like anything Jake had ever seen before. It was about the size of a small airplane, but the shape was all wrong. The metal looked smooth and curved in places where it was not damaged. Strange patterns covered parts of the hull that looked almost like they were alive. Some sections glowed with a soft blue light even though there was no power source Jake could see. The crash had twisted and bent many parts, but Jake could still tell this was something special. Murphy kicked at a piece of debris with his boot. "Government boys came and took all the good stuff 3 weeks ago," he said. "Left me with this hunk of junk. Been trying to sell it ever since, but nobody wants to pay what it's worth." Jake walked around the wreck slowly. His hands itched to touch the strange metal, but he kept them to himself for now. He had been fixing cars and machines since he was 12 years old. His father had taught him that every machine had a story to tell if you knew how to listen. This ship was telling him something, but he could not quite understand what it was saying yet. "Where did it come from?" Jake asked. Murphy shrugged. "Some farmer found it buried in his field down in Nevada. Made a crater the size of a house when it hit. Lucky nobody got hurt. Military folks said it was just some experimental aircraft, but we both know that ain't true." Jake bent down to look at one of the intact panels. The patterns seemed to shift and move when he was not looking directly at them. The metal felt warm even though it had been sitting in the cold morning air for hours. There were symbols carved into the surface that definitely did not come from any human language he had ever seen. "How much you want for it?" Jake asked. Murphy's grin got wider. 15,000, take it or leave it." Jake almost laughed. He made decent money at Henderson's auto repair, but 15,000 was more than he had saved in 2 years. "You're crazy, Murphy. This thing is just scrap metal." "Scrap metal that glows in the dark and weighs half what it should," Murphy replied. "This ain't normal metal, boy. You know it, and I know it. Someone with the right knowledge could figure out how it works, maybe make themselves rich in the process." Jake had to admit the old man had a point. The ship definitely was not made from anything humans had invented. The metal was lighter than aluminum but felt stronger than steel. Some of the damaged sections showed internal structures that looked like they were grown rather than built. It was like looking at technology that was hundreds of years ahead of anything on Earth. "I can give you 8,000, Jake said. "That's all I got." Murphy shook his head. 12,000 final offer. They went back and forth for 20 minutes. Jake pointed out all the damage and how much work it would take to move the wreck. Murphy kept talking about how valuable the technology could be. Finally, they agreed on $10,000. Jake would have to empty his savings account and borrow a little from his emergency fund, but he could make it work. "You'll need to get it out of here by the end of the week," Murphy said as they shook hands. "I got other customers coming to look at space." Jake nodded. He already had a plan for that. His friend Pete had a flatbed truck and owed him a favor from when Jake had fixed his transmission for free. The bigger problem would be explaining to his neighbor, Linda, why he was parking an alien spaceship in his backyard. Linda Patterson lived in the house next to Jake's small place on the edge of town. She was a retired teacher who kept an eye on everyone's business whether they wanted her to or not. Jake knew she would have plenty to say about his latest purchase. She already thought he spent too much time and money on his mechanical projects. The paperwork took another hour. Murphy insisted on cash, which meant Jake had to drive back to town and clean out his bank account. The teller gave him strange looks when he asked for $10,000 in cash, but she did not ask questions. Jake signed a bill of sale that described the wreck as miscellaneous aircraft parts and tried not to think about how much money he was spending. By afternoon, Jake was back at the salvage yard with Pete and the flatbed truck. Loading the wreck was easier than expected because the alien metal was so much lighter than it looked. They used chains and straps to secure it, but Jake worried the whole time that they might damage something important. The drive back to town was nerve-wracking. The wreck was covered with a tarp, but its strange shape was still obvious to anyone who looked closely. Jake kept expecting police cars to pull them over and start asking difficult questions. Fortunately, the roads were mostly empty and they made it to Jake's garage without incident. Pete helped him unload the wreck behind Jake's house where a tall fence would hide it from most of the neighbors. "You sure you know what you're doing with this thing?" Pete asked as they pulled off the straps. Jake looked at the alien ship sitting in his backyard. The metal was still glowing softly in the fading daylight. Strange symbols pulsed along the hull like a slow heartbeat. He had no idea what he was doing, but something deep inside told him this was the most important thing he had ever bought. "Not really," Jake admitted. "But I guess I'm about to find out." 3 weeks had passed since Jake brought the alien wreck home, and his life had completely changed. Every spare moment was spent in his garage working on the strange ship. He had called in sick to Henderson's auto repair more times than he could count. His boss was getting angry, but Jake could not bring himself to care about fixing normal cars when he had this incredible puzzle sitting in his backyard. The ship was teaching him things he never thought possible. The metal could heal itself when he provided the right kind of energy. Jake had discovered this by accident when he connected a car battery to one of the damaged sections. The twisted metal had slowly straightened itself over the course of several hours. It was like watching a broken bone mend in fast motion. Jake had also figured out how to activate some of the ship's systems. The glowing panels were actually touch screens that responded to pressure and heat. Most of the symbols made no sense to him, but some seemed to represent basic concepts like power, direction, and temperature. He had managed to turn on interior lights and even get some kind of air circulation system working. The power source was the most amazing thing of all. Deep inside the ship was a chamber containing what looked like a cluster of crystals. They glowed with their own light and seemed to generate unlimited energy. Jake had hooked up meters and instruments but could not figure out how they worked. The crystals just kept producing power without any fuel or outside input he could detect. Tonight Jake was working later than usual. Linda had stopped complaining about the noise from his garage, but she still gave him worried looks whenever she saw him. His friend Pete had come by a few times to check on his progress, and each visit left Pete shaking his head in amazement. "That thing ain't from around here," Pete kept saying. "You better be careful messing with it." Jake was trying to open what he thought might be a cargo hold when he heard the sound. It was low and rumbling like a big dog growling in the distance. He stopped working and listened carefully. The sound came again, definitely from inside the ship. His first thought was that a stray animal had somehow gotten trapped inside, but that seemed impossible. He had been all through the ship multiple times and never seen any large open spaces where an animal could hide. The growling came a third time, louder now and clearly coming from the section he was trying to open. Jake grabbed a flashlight and crowbar and approached the damaged access panel more carefully. The metal around the edges was still bent and twisted from the crash. He had been planning to straighten it out once he figured out how to get inside. Working slowly and quietly, Jake pried at the edges of the panel. The alien metal was tough, but he finally managed to create a gap big enough to see through. He shined his flashlight into the dark space beyond and nearly dropped the light. When two glowing amber eyes stared back at him, the creature inside growled again, and Jake could see white teeth that looked very sharp. It was definitely alive and definitely not from Earth. Jake's heart was pounding, but he forced himself to stay calm and take a better look. The animal was about the size of a large dog, but that was where any similarity ended. Its fur was the deepest black Jake had ever seen. The color seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The creature had 6 legs instead of 4, and its body was longer and more flexible than any Earth animal. Strange devices were somehow attached to its fur along its spine. They glowed with the same blue light as the ship's systems and pulsed in a steady rhythm. The most startling thing was the intelligence in those amber eyes. This was not just an animal. Jake could see awareness and thought behind that fierce stare. The creature was studying him just as carefully as he was studying it. There was a moment of perfect stillness as human and alien regarded each other. Through the gap in the damaged panel, Jake slowly reached for a larger crowbar. He needed to open this panel properly and see what he was dealing with. The creature watched his every movement but did not try to attack. If anything, it seemed curious about what Jake was doing. When Jake started working on the panel again, the growling stopped. It took another 20 minutes to bend the metal, enough to create an opening big enough for the creature to come out if it wanted to. Jake stepped back and waited to see what would happen. The alien animal poked its head through the opening and sniffed the air. Its nose was larger than a dog's and seemed more sensitive. Jake could see its nostrils flaring as it sampled all the new scents. The creature pulled itself through the opening with surprising grace despite having 6 legs to coordinate. Standing in Jake's garage, it was even more impressive than it had looked in the confined space. Its legs were powerful and ended in what looked like paws with retractable claws. The tail was long and muscular and ended in what appeared to be some kind of natural display screen that showed shifting patterns of light. Jake and the alien stared at each other for a long moment. The creature's tail display shifted to show what looked like question marks and symbols Jake did not recognize. It tilted its head to one side in a gesture that was almost dog-like despite its clearly non-terrestrial origins. "Well," Jake said quietly, "I guess you've been sleeping in there this whole time." The creature's ears perked up at the sound of his voice. They were larger than dog ears and seemed to move independently of each other. Jake noticed they had the same blue glow as the devices along its spine. Everything about this animal seemed to be connected to the ship's technology. Jake slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out half of a sandwich he had been saving for later. The creature's nose twitched as it caught the scent of food. Jake tore off a piece of meat and held it out carefully. The alien animal approached cautiously, clearly torn between hunger and wariness of this strange human. Finally, hunger won. The creature delicately took the meat from Jake's fingers with surprisingly gentle teeth. It chewed thoughtfully for a moment, then looked at Jake with what might have been gratitude. The tail display changed to show new symbols that felt somehow more friendly. "I think I'm going to call you Rex," Jake said. "You look like a Rex to me." The creature that was now Rex tilted its head again and made a sound that was not quite a bark and not quite a purr. Jake took that as approval. He had found a broken alien ship and somehow ended up with an alien companion. His quiet life as a small-town mechanic was definitely over. The first week with Rex was harder than Jake had expected. The alien creature was clearly intelligent, but also deeply unhappy about his situation. He refused most of the food Jake offered and spent long hours staring at the damaged ship with what looked like sadness in those glowing amber eyes. Rex would not let Jake get close enough to examine the strange devices attached to his fur, and he growled whenever Jake tried to touch the ship's more sensitive systems. Jake tried everything he could think of to make Rex more comfortable. He brought out blankets and old cushions to make a bed, but Rex preferred to sleep on the cold metal floor near the ship. Jake offered water in various containers, but Rex only drank from a small pool that had formed where rainwater collected in a damaged section of the hull. The alien clearly had very specific needs that Jake did not understand yet. The breakthrough came by accident on a Friday evening. Jake was working on a particularly stubborn section of hull plating when his screwdriver slipped and cut a deep gash across his palm. Blood dripped onto the alien metal as Jake cursed and looked around for something to stop the bleeding. Rex appeared beside him so quietly that Jake jumped in surprise. The alien creature studied Jake's injured hand with intense focus. His tail display showed rapidly changing symbols that felt urgent and concerned. Before Jake could react, Rex pressed one of the glowing devices on his spine against the bleeding cut. Jake felt a strange tingling sensation that was not exactly painful, but definitely not normal either. The bleeding stopped immediately. Jake watched in amazement as the edges of the cut began to close. Within minutes, the wound had completely healed, leaving only a thin white line that faded as he watched. Jake flexed his fingers and felt no pain at all. It was like the injury had never happened. Rex stepped back and made a sound that might have been satisfaction. His tail display now showed symbols that felt somehow pleased or proud. Jake stared at his healed hand, then at the alien creature who had just saved him from a trip to the emergency room. "Thank you," Jake said softly. Rex tilted his head and his ears moved in a way that suggested he understood the tone, if not the words. From that moment, something changed between them. Rex began accepting the food Jake offered, though he clearly preferred raw meat to anything cooked. Jake started buying steaks and chicken from the grocery store, and Rex seemed much happier. With fresh protein, more importantly, Rex began showing Jake how the ship really worked. The alien creature would approach different control panels and press his paws against specific symbols. Systems would activate that Jake had never been able to turn on before. Lights would brighten, displays would show new information, and sections of the ship would hum with renewed power. Jake realized that Rex was not just a passenger or pet. The creature was somehow connected to the ship itself. The devices along his spine seemed to interface directly with the ship's computer systems. Rex could communicate with the vessel in ways that Jake was only beginning to understand. The ship also had a name, Jake discovered. Rex showed him a series of symbols that appeared on multiple displays throughout the vessel. When Jake tried to pronounce the alien words, Rex corrected him with patient repetition until Jake could make sounds that were close enough. The name meant something like Star Whisper in Jake's rough translation. Rex began teaching Jake the basic principles of alien engineering. The crystals that powered the ship were not just energy sources but also information storage devices. Each crystal contained vast amounts of data about navigation, engineering, and species from across the galaxy. Rex could access this information by touching his biomechanical interfaces to specific points on the crystal array. The ship's hull was not just self-repairing but actually alive in some sense. The metal could grow and change shape when needed. It could become harder for protection or softer for comfort. The strange patterns Jake had noticed were actually a form of communication system that allowed different parts of the ship to coordinate with each other. Jake's favorite discovery was that the ship had something like a personality. When Rex interfaced with the main computer, Jake could sense a presence that felt ancient and wise, but also playful. The ship seemed pleased to have visitors and was eager to show off its capabilities. Lights would flash in welcoming patterns when Jake entered certain sections, and the artificial gravity would adjust automatically to make him more comfortable. Rex himself was also a revelation. Despite his fierce appearance, he had a sense of humor that came across through his expressive tail displays and the way he arranged objects in Jake's garage. Rex liked to reorganize Jake's tools when he was not looking, always putting them in more logical arrangements that actually made Jake's work easier. The alien creature also enjoyed Earth music, especially the classic rock station Jake liked to play while working. One evening, Jake was listening to an old song by Queen when he noticed Rex's tail display pulsing in time with the music. The alien creature was sitting very still with his ears pointed toward the radio, clearly enjoying the complex rhythms and harmonies. From then on, Jake made sure to keep music playing while they worked together. The biggest surprise was Rex's personality quirks. The alien was particular about his grooming and expected Jake to brush his strange fur at least once a day. Rex would present himself at a specific time each evening and wait patiently while Jake worked out tangles and cleaned the biomechanical devices along his spine. The creature purred like a giant cat during these sessions, a sound that vibrated through the garage floor. Rex also had opinions about Jake's work habits. If Jake made a mistake or used the wrong tool, Rex would make disapproving sounds and point with one of his 6 paws toward the correct approach. The alien creature seemed to understand human engineering principles even though his own technology was far more advanced. He could bridge the gap between Jake's mechanical knowledge and the ship's alien systems. As the weeks passed, Jake began to understand that Rex had been in some kind of suspended animation during the crash. The alien creature had been protecting the ship's core systems while they healed from whatever battle had brought them to Earth. Rex was slowly recovering his strength and memory, but he was also clearly homesick for a world Jake could barely Imagine late at night, when the work was done and the garage was quiet. Rex would sometimes stare up at the stars through the open garage door. His tail would show patterns that felt sad and longing. Jake would sit beside his alien friend and try to offer comfort, even though he knew there was nothing he could say that would ease the pain of being stranded so far from home. 2 months into their partnership, Jake and Rex had developed a working relationship that amazed even Jake himself. The Star Whisper was coming alive under their combined efforts in ways that neither of them could have achieved alone. Jake's mechanical intuition helped him understand the ship's physical systems, while Rex's biotechnological connection allowed him to interface with the vessel's consciousness directly. The ship's artificial gravity was now working perfectly throughout most of the vessel. Jake could walk upright in sections that had been twisted and damaged, feeling the gentle pull that kept his feet on what the ship considered to be the floor. The air recycling systems hummed quietly, providing fresh atmosphere that smelled faintly of something like pine trees mixed with ocean breeze. Even the hull plating had regained its original sleek appearance. Glowing with health and power, Rex had grown more comfortable with Earth life but maintained his particular habits. He still demanded his daily grooming sessions and had developed a routine of inspecting Jake's work each morning before they began their projects. The alien creature had also become fascinated with Earth food beyond just raw meat. Jake had discovered that Rex enjoyed certain fruits, especially apples and oranges, though he would only eat them if Jake peeled them first. The most remarkable development was their communication system. Rex's tail displays had become increasingly sophisticated, showing not just emotions but complex technical diagrams and star charts. Jake had learned to read many of the basic symbols, though he suspected he was only understanding a fraction of what Rex was trying to tell him. In return, Jake had started using simple drawings and gestures to explain human concepts to Rex. Their peaceful routine was shattered on a Wednesday morning when Jake heard vehicles pulling up outside his garage. He looked through the window and saw 2 black SUVs parked in his driveway. Men in dark suits were getting out and walking toward his house with the confident stride of people who were used to getting their way. Rex appeared beside Jake instantly, his fur standing on end and his amber eyes glowing brighter than usual. The alien creature had somehow sensed the approaching danger even before the vehicles arrived. His tail display showed warning symbols that Jake had learned meant immediate threat. The lead agent knocked on Jake's front door with authority. When Jake answered, the man flashed an official-looking badge and introduced himself as Agent Collins from a government department that Jake had never heard of. Behind Collins stood 3 other agents, all wearing the same serious expressions and dark sunglasses. "Mr. Morrison," Collins said in a voice that brooked no argument, "we need to discuss some unusual energy readings that have been detected in this area. May we come in?" Jake knew this moment would come eventually, but he had hoped to have more time to prepare. "What kind of energy readings?" he asked, trying to sound innocent. Collins smiled, but it was not a friendly expression. "The kind that suggests you have been experimenting with technology that poses a national security risk. We have reports of electromagnetic anomalies centered on your property. We also have satellite images showing unusual heat signatures from your garage." Jake's mind raced as he tried to figure out what to say. Behind him, he could hear Rex moving through the house toward the garage. The alien creature was positioning himself to protect the ship if necessary. Jake hoped Rex would not do anything that would make the situation worse. "I restore old cars," Jake said. "Sometimes I use equipment that might cause interference with radio signals." Agent Collins looked past Jake toward the garage. "Old cars do not typically generate the kind of readings we have been monitoring, Mr. Morrison. We are going to need to examine your workshop and confiscate any materials that might pose a security threat." That was when Rex made his move. Jake felt a strange tingling in the air as the ship's systems activated. The lights in his house flickered and his neighbor's dog started barking frantically. Through the garage windows, Jake could see a soft blue glow building as the Star Whisper's defensive systems came online. Collins and his team immediately became alert. They reached for weapons under their jackets as they recognized that something was seriously wrong. "What is that?" Collins demanded, pointing toward the garage where the glow was getting brighter. Jake realized he had no choice but to trust Rex. "And the ship." "That," he said calmly, "is something you really do not want to mess with." The garage door exploded outward in a shower of sparks and bent metal. Not from an explosion, but from some kind of energy field that pushed everything away. From the ship. Jake could see the Star Whisper hovering 3 feet off the ground, its hull blazing with protective energy. Rex stood beneath it, his biomechanical interfaces glowing as he communicated with the vessel's defense systems. Collins and his agents drew their weapons, but Jake could see the uncertainty in their faces. This was clearly beyond anything they had expected to encounter. The energy field around the ship was deflecting their radio signals and making their equipment malfunction. One agent's phone started smoking, and he quickly threw it away from himself. "Stand down," Collins shouted, though Jake was not sure if he was talking to his team or to Rex, and the ship. Rex responded by expanding the defensive field. Jake watched in amazement as an invisible barrier pushed the agents and their vehicles backward down the driveway. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. The Star Whisper and its guardian were not going to be taken without a fight. Collins tried to advance against the energy field, but found himself unable to move forward. It was like walking into an increasingly strong wind that eventually became impossible to push through. His agents tried flanking maneuvers, but the field seemed to extend in all directions around the ship. "Mr. Morrison," Collins called out from the edge of the field, "you need to shut down whatever that thing is before someone gets hurt." Jake looked at Rex, who was maintaining perfect concentration on his interface with the ship. The alien creature's tail showed symbols that Jake interpreted as questioning whether they should take more aggressive action. Jake shook his head slightly, and Rex's display shifted to acknowledgement. "Agent Collins," Jake called back, "I think you and your team should leave now. This technology is not something your department is equipped to handle." Collins looked frustrated, but he was clearly outmatched. After a brief radio conversation with someone higher up the chain of command, he signaled his team to withdraw. "This is not over, Morrison," he warned as they got back into their vehicles. "We will be back with better equipment and more authority." As the SUVs drove away, Rex gradually powered down the ship's defenses. The Star Whisper settled gently back onto the garage floor, and the energy field faded. Rex approached Jake with his tail showing symbols of concern and apology. The alien clearly understood that their secret was now blown. Jake scratched behind Rex's ears in their usual gesture of affection. "It's okay, boy," he said. "We both knew this would happen sooner or later." Rex's tail display shifted to show star charts and navigation symbols. Jake understood what his alien friend was suggesting. They could repair the ship enough to leave Earth before the government returned with heavier weapons and more agents. It would mean abandoning everything Jake had ever known, but it might be their only chance for freedom. Jake looked around at his small house and quiet neighborhood. Then he looked at Rex and the incredible ship that had changed his life completely. The choice was becoming clear, even though it scared him more than anything he had ever contemplated before. The decision haunted Jake for 3 days after the government agents left. Rex made it clear through their developing communication system that the Star Whisper could be made spaceworthy again, though not at full capacity. The ship would need proper repair facilities at what Rex indicated was a trading station several star systems away. More importantly, Rex had made it obvious that Jake was welcome to come along on the journey. Jake spent hours walking around his small house, touching familiar objects and trying to imagine never seeing them again. His coffee mug with the chip on the handle, the old recliner where he watched television every evening, the photograph of his parents on the kitchen table. Everything that had made up his quiet life as a small-town mechanic would be left behind. Forever, Linda Patterson had noticed the government vehicles and knocked on Jake's door the next morning full of questions and concern. Jake told her he was having some legal troubles related to his restoration business but could not give her details. Linda was not satisfied with that explanation, but she could see the stress on Jake's face and did not push for more information. "You know you can talk to me about anything," she said as she prepared to leave. "I have been your neighbor for 8 years and I care about what happens to you." Jake almost told her everything right then. Linda had always been kind to him, bringing over soup when he was sick and helping him with paperwork he did not understand. She deserved better than lies and evasion. But how could he explain that he was considering leaving Earth with an alien creature to explore the galaxy? She would think he had completely lost his mind. Pete visited on Friday evening and immediately noticed that something was wrong. "You look like you have not slept in days," he said, settling into Jake's kitchen with a beer. "Those government people really got you spooked, did not they?" Jake had told Pete a simplified version of what happened, leaving out most of the details about Rex and the ship's capabilities. As far as Pete knew, Jake had been working on some kind of experimental technology that had attracted unwanted attention. Pete assumed it was related to the salvaged aircraft parts Jake had bought from Murphy. "They will be back," Jake said. "Probably with more people and better equipment. I do not think I can stay here much longer." Pete leaned forward with concern. "Where would you go? This is your home, Jake. You have your job and your house and people who care about you." Jake looked toward the garage where Rex was probably running diagnostics on the ship's navigation systems. "There might be opportunities somewhere else. Places where I could use my skills in ways that matter more." "You're talking crazy," Pete said. "What opportunities?" "You are a good mechanic, but this is not exactly a big city with lots of options." Jake realized he could not explain his decision in any way that would make sense to Pete. How could he describe the pull he felt when Rex showed him star charts containing thousands of worlds? How could he convey the excitement of working with technology that could reshape humanity's understanding of the universe? Pete would think he was having some kind of breakdown. Rex settled the question for him that weekend. The alien creature showed Jake a series of displays indicating that more government vehicles were approaching the area. Satellites were monitoring. Jake's property and radio chatter suggested a much larger operation was being planned. They had perhaps 24 hours before overwhelming force would arrive to seize both the ship and Rex. Jake made his choice with surprising calm. He called Henderson's auto repair and quit his job, claiming a family emergency that required him to leave town immediately. He contacted his bank and arranged to transfer his remaining savings to an account he could access from anywhere. He wrote a letter to Linda explaining that he had to disappear for reasons he could not discuss and asking her to watch over his house until he could arrange to sell it. The hardest part was calling Pete. His friend listened in stunned silence. As Jake explained that he was leaving town and might not be back for a long time, Pete tried to argue and demand explanations, but Jake remained firm. Some opportunities only came once in a lifetime, and this was his chance to do something extraordinary. With his life, Rex helped Jake gather supplies for the journey. The alien creature indicated they would need food, water, and basic tools for the trip to the trading station. Rex also showed Jake how to interface with the ship's environmental systems, so he could survive in the artificial atmosphere during the voyage. The biomechanical devices along Rex's spine could extend temporary connections to human nervous systems, allowing Jake to communicate directly with the ship's consciousness on their last night on Earth. Jake sat in the Star Whisper's command center with Rex curled up beside him. The ship's main display showed star charts that boggled Jake's mind with their scope and complexity. Thousands of worlds connected by trade routes and communication networks that spanned the galaxy. Rex indicated that some of these worlds had been waiting centuries for contact with Earth, but humanity's governments had proven too unstable and aggressive for open communication. Rex lifted his head and fixed Jake with that intelligent amber gaze. His tail display showed question marks and symbols that Jake had learned indicated concern for his emotional state. The alien creature understood that Jake was leaving behind everything he had ever known and wanted to make sure his human friend was truly ready for what lay ahead. Jake reached out and scratched behind one of Rex's 6 ears, earning the familiar rumbling purr that vibrated through the ship's hull. "Yeah, boy," he said softly, looking out at the stars through the newly repaired viewport. I am ready too. The Star Whisper lifted off silently in the pre-dawn darkness. Jake felt the artificial gravity adjust as they rose above the atmosphere, and saw Earth shrinking below them through the observation windows. The planet looked beautiful and fragile from space, a blue marble floating in the cosmic dark. Jake felt a moment of doubt as he realized he might never see it again. Rex moved to the navigation console and began interfacing with the ship's systems. The main display showed their route to the first waypoint, a journey that would take several weeks even with the ship's advanced propulsion. Jake strapped himself into what the ship designated as the human crew station and tried to prepare himself for his first experience with faster-than-light travel. The ship jumped to hyperspace with a sensation like falling upward through warm honey. Jake's vision blurred for a moment, and then the stars outside became streaming lines of light. They were traveling between star systems at speeds that human science considered impossible. Jake Morrison, small-town mechanic, was now a crew member aboard an interstellar vessel heading toward adventures he could barely imagine. As Earth dwindled behind them and became just another point of light among the stars, Rex's tail displayed a pattern Jake was learning to recognize. Contentment mixed with anticipation and perhaps a touch of gratitude. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but they would face it together, one star system at a time. Jake had bought a broken ship and found something far more valuable than he ever expected. He had found a loyal companion and a doorway to infinite possibilities among the stars.